you've been warning us about this for quite a long time, and people, I think, don't realize it. But I mean, once they start seeing it actually hitting their wallets, maybe they start to realize that, yes, all these initiatives cost us, and they're costing a lot.
Yeah, it costs us big time. So the first carbon tax is still going to be there and it is still going to triple within the next 7 years. So as of right now, it's 14 cents a liter for gasoline, 17 cents a liter for diesel. So on average, you're paying around $15, $16 extra every time you're filling up even a light duty pickup truck. That's in the first carbon tax. This new carbon tax, the second one that's being layered on top, it's actually fashioned after British Columbia's second carbon tax. Anybody who's ever driven across the Rockies over to BC and looked up at the gas pump has gone, holy crap, why is that so much more expensive? Well, two reasons. One, they don't get the discount. So Premier Daniel Smith gives us the provincial fuel tax discount here. So we're saving 13 cents right off the hop. Two, they have a second carbon tax over there, and it's a big one. It's like, 15, 16 cents per liter extra. So Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, not kidding, took a look at BC and said, huh, that's super awesome. I'm going to do that to the whole country. And so as of July 1st, he's now imposed this government fuel regulation, which penalizes companies for the carbon content of their product. Now, we don't know how much it's going to cost right out of the chute, right? Because it takes a while. So the company gets the cost incurred. They then try to compensate. Some of them might use more ethanol for a little while in their blend, blah, blah, blah. Eventually, though, that cost is going to trickle down to you and me at the gas pump, and we're going to pay for it. So within the next 7 years, the Parliamentary Budget Officer says the second carbon tax is going to cost around 14 cents extra per liter of gasoline, around 17 cents extra per liter for diesel. Long story short, Albertan families are going to get hit the hardest. Within the next 7 years, Corey, we're going to be out around $3,900 per Alberta family. That's with rebates factored in. That's net cost of Trudeau's two carbon taxes.
But I mean, they're giving it back to us, right? We get rebates, and they just announced, they're going to give us a bunch of breaks on our grocery bills, right? Like, it's just cycles through the government, and we all win.
Yeah, sure. If only it worked like that. So two things. It's almost insulting for the federal government to think that people are silly enough to think that the government is a magical wealth producing machine. It's not. All it does is take your money, run it through a bureaucracy, and spit it back at you sometimes. So number one, that cost I just listed was net. That's with the rebates factored in. That's $3,900 with that factored in. So you're out that amount as an Alberta family. Two, just don't take the money in the first place, right? If this is all supposed to make you magically more wealthy, then why are they doing this? The fact is they're fibbing. They're not telling the truth. They want gasoline and diesel and natural gas and propane to be unaffordable. That's the feature, not the bug. So every time the politician at the federal government level opens their mouths and says, oh, you're going to get more back than you pay in, number one, that's not true. Number two, that contradicts their entire purpose of their carbon tax, which is meant to punish you for using oil and gas.
And it's not working. That's the other thing. I mean, BC has been carbon taxing for a long time. You were out there until recently, and I remember you guys would report on that. Emissions haven't dropped in BC. If a carbon tax was going to work, it would have started working by now.
100%. So this is where, as somebody, I grew up in the interior mostly, but I spent some of my formative years on Vancouver Island. I get it. I've wandered around barefoot on Gulf Islands. I would describe myself as a small E environmentalist. I pick up litter every time I'm walking near the river. It's not helping the environment. Like, to slow that down, British Columbia has had the two highest carbon taxes in North America for years. Their emissions keep on going up anyway. This is the government's own data. Okay. Now, apart from when people were locked in their homes and stuff at the beginning of 2020, where you saw a dip, other than those weird moments, it goes up and up and up steadily. Why? Because, like and all your viewers know, people need to drive to work, they need to heat their home, and they need to eat food. They don't have an affordable, alternative, dependable energy source to switch to. This isn't like paper bags or plastic bags. There's nothing for them to switch to. They have to drive to work and they usually use natural gas to heat their home. And truckers use diesel, and farmers use diesel and natural gas and propane to both heat their barns and to dry their grain. So if you increase the cost of that element of those fuels, you increase the cost of everything because people can't opt out, right? And so this is why this is such a brutal punishment for people. And what really gets me going, Corey, is that the Parliamentary Budget Officer themselves, an independent government watchdog that keeps an eye on the budget, says this hurts low income people like single mothers and fixed income folks the worst. It hurts them the most because for folks who don't remember what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck, that literally means your paycheck's out there paying for stuff, everything, rent, your car payment, groceries, whatever. You increase the cost of one of those essentials and you're cutting into their food budget. You're making them have to find a cheaper place to live. Good luck. So that's why it's hurting those folks the most, even with the rebates factored in. And this is where I can't understand why the feds aren't listening.
Well, and part of it too, and you sort of touched a bit on that, is the indirect costs. I mean, we see it at the pump, we see it on our heating bill, but also the delivery of a lot of products and services to us, retail brick and mortar places, they're all paying that as well. And of course, they have to incorporate that into the prices of the goods and services they provide. So you still end up paying it down the road for the other consumers of it in the business world.
100%. And so just imagine you were, a store. You're a big store. You have to keep it cool in the summer and heat it in the winter. Most companies would use natural gas to do that. Boom, there's a carbon tax. All those trucks that deliver all the stuff that we eat and use that are backing into their loading bays, those are running on diesel. Those get a carbon tax. And a lot of folks forget too that most of our locomotives in Canada run on diesel. It's around $2,400 extra per fill up of one of those diesel locomotives in the carbon tax alone. That's just the carbon tax. For a big rig truck, like if you've got, a Peterbilt and you got a couple of those diesel cylinders, that's around $160 extra just in the first carbon tax on diesel. So that one's going to triple in the next 7 years, plus the second carbon tax is going to add more pain. And so this is where every time a politician opens their mouths about affordability, you should really question them and ask them how seriously they're taking affordability when they're making everything more expensive through the carbon taxes.
So something Dave mentioned before, and what you and your organization just put out in a release, though, is this carbon tax isn't being applied equally across the country. It appears that we've got a special province that, unsurprisingly, to be honest, is getting a break on it.
Guess which one? It's the province of Quebec. I know your viewers are shocked. I can tell at the Western Standard. So what's interesting here, Corey, is that this is now getting really highlighted because up until July 1st, Atlantic Canada had a cap and trade deal. So they were paying a much lower carbon tax. I think it was around 2 cents per liter of gasoline, where the rest of us are paying 14 cents. Why is that? Well, they have a more energy intensive economy for heating, all blah, blah, blah. Whatever reason they had a cap and trade deal so that they had a slower roll into the mandatory minimum federal carbon tax. Now that's gone. Boom. Overnight, their cost of their carbon tax went up 12 cents a liter on gasoline. That's a big number. If you're filling up a minivan, that's $10. Boom. Added on to your extra cost overnight. And so that got a lot of news out that way in Atlantic Canada. And now it puts into sharp relief the fact that Quebec is the last one standing. They're the last ones that have a cap and trade deal. Now, they don't have as good a deal as Atlantic Canada had going for a while. I think they're around 10 cents a liter or so, but they've still got a deal. This is all to say there should be one rate for the carbon tax across Canada, and it should be zero.
Well, that's it. I mean, that's the we could all agree that would have an equal impact upon every province in the country. But let me play devil's advocate.
Sure.
Let's assume emissions are going to cause the world to continue burning, and somehow Canada has to do its part, in reducing these emissions. If not carbon taxes, what should they do? I mean, that's a fair question that people ask. If they're concerned about the problem, carbon taxes aren't working, then what should the government do?
Hey, totally legit question. And a lot of people care about the environment, myself included. Like, I hand sewed my baby's cloth diapers. Okay. I take this stuff real seriously. I buy almost all my stuff used because it reduces the impact on the environment and it doesn't use up resources that don't need to be used. So I get it. Three things. One, the carbon tax isn't working. Straight up. If that's your issue, if you wake up at 3 a.m. worried, oh my gosh, global emissions, like it's really upsetting me, the Canadian carbon taxes aren't making a dent in that. Who said that? Actually, it was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said it back in 2018, I believe, in French. He said it on the very popular Quebec talk show, Tout le monde en parle. And in translation, he basically said, we could shut down everything tomorrow. And what he meant is trucking, heating, eating, like we'll go die in a cave. We could shut down everything tomorrow and it wouldn't really make a big difference. Interestingly, the parliamentary budget officer said mostly the same thing, that Canada, I'm paraphrasing, Canada's emissions are not significant enough to make a dent in global emissions. So, one, it's not working. Even with the carbon taxes, even though British Columbia is one of the most unaffordable places to live on Earth, they're punishing their people. It's still not making a dent and it's not working because our emissions keep on going up. Two, even if it did, our emissions in Canada don't do enough to really move the needle on global emissions. And three, there are alternatives. So the tax isn't working. What could we possibly do? And so we're not the emissions people, we're the tax people. But it kind of seems a little obvious to look at the big end of the arithmetic problem. So there's about a few 100 million people in India who burn things like wood and animal dung every day. This is according to the Indian government saying this, that this is their fuel source. And they apparently want to switch to cleaner burning sources of energy, like natural gas. We've got a lot of that. So why doesn't the government look at doing that to really tackle the big end of the arithmetic problem when it comes to global emissions and heavy pollutants? Why not ship them cleaner energy instead of punishing people here in Canada for driving their minivans and buying groceries?
Oh, yeah, and if we exported some nice clean liquid natural gas and increase that, they could get some tax revenues and they could apply that to, say, the unclean drinking water on First Nations
Right?
reserves or planting more trees in areas where the fires did burn things. Crazy concepts, but I mean, they still can't seem to get off the idea that taxes can actually fix things.
Then this is the thing. Number one, we knew they wouldn't. We were warning them years ago that this wouldn't work. We have a perfect lived example in British Columbia that this does not work. Okay. Even if they try to trot it out and say it'll be revenue neutral, governments are going to government and they're going to cook the books, which is exactly what they did in British Columbia. It was only revenue neutral for a few years before they started skimming. Okay. So we know it doesn't work. We know it's making people poorer. We know it's driving up the cost of living, and we know it's not helping the environment. So, folks, we need to rework this. We need a different approach, and taxes are not it.
Well, I knew you guys wouldn't support taxes as an approach anyways, or it's pretty unlikely, but all the same, I do appreciate the work you guys do and bringing that to light because Canadians don't necessarily see how they're getting it. I noticed actually a side note, I threw that out on Twitter. I see another outlet in Canada labeled you guys as an anti-tax organization. So you're anti-taxers, and boy, the games they play with the terminology.
I'll put that on a t-shirt, man. Anti-taxer. We should put that in our swag shop. But you know, it's one of those things, and I think I can't remember if it was because of the carbon tax or because of the so-called media bailout and the government funding the media that we got that label on Twitter from that. But either way, taxes, if it's either the media bailout that they're trying to do and they keep fumbling really badly like today, or doubling up on our carbon taxes, none of it works.